the 29th of May, 1985, 39 football fans were crushed to death.
It was hard to comprehend. We just couldn't believe a night that had began so promisingly and could end so tragically.
The tragedy at the Heysel Stadium was seen live on television by over 1 billion people. Hooliganism had brought English football to its lowest point in the eyes of the world.
I don't even want to think about the English fans. They were animals, drunks.
The response from the government and from the FA would be a turning point in the history of the sport. Heysel would change forever the face of English football.
It still troubles me when the name Heysel comes up and tears flow.
Today, the English Premiership is the most popular league in the world. Football is fashionable, a glamour game for men, women and children, played in some of the world's most modern stadiums. It's a money-spinning sellout played by some of the greatest and wealthiest international stars.
You can come from any part of the world now and play in this Premiership. English football has come a long way.
Things used to be different. In the late 1970s and early 80s, English football was in crisis. The game was played in decrepit stadiums, with the fans exposed on windswept terraces, and it was regularly followed by men with little interest in the finer points of the beautiful game.
Football looked like yesterday's sport, being attended by yesterday's people, a sort of sub-race of really unpleasant and unattractive individuals who, certainly in the eyes of people like Mrs. Thatcher, summed up everything that was most awful about the English nation.
Hooliganism had been a growing problem for English football, and the terraces were the last place to look for family entertainment. By the mid-80s, Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher identified 3 violent ills in modern Britain: the IRA, striking miners, and football hooligans. English football had become infamous for its hooligan element, and travelling supporters regularly brought shame on Thatcher's Britain, as they exported their violence to cities across Europe.
This was something that focused in international sense that Britain were, we British were pretty awful people. We were washed up as a country, and instead of going out and creating an empire, we were just looking for a fight, having got kettled up in any bar that was stupid enough to serve us.
In March 1985, the crisis grew deeper as the nation watched live television pictures of Millwall fans going on the rampage at Luton Town. The sense of football as a doomed sport grew even stronger. Just 8 weeks later, as an old wooden stand at Bradford City caught fire, and 56 fans lost their lives.
The Prime Minister walked into the stadium this morning. Suddenly, the full horror of the Holocaust came home.
There was a greed for taking all the money that they could, and no investment in taking care of the game.
While English football off the pitch was in crisis, on the pitch it was triumphant. English teams dominated Europe, and by 1985 had won the European Cup 7 times in 8 seasons. Most successful of all were Liverpool, 4 times the European champions since 1977.
There was this terrible paradox where, we were the powerful club football nation of Europe. The English clubs were winning the European Cup and setting the standard.
Once again, in 1985, Liverpool proved unstoppable as they progressed to the final of the European Cup.
Here we were on our 5th European Cup night, so to speak. In '84, we went to Rome and won it in their stadium, so we regarded ourselves as the forerunners, really.
Standing between Liverpool and victory in Europe were the Italian champions, Juventus.
Quindi una partita importantissima e noi eravamo lì a Bruxelles.
It was a very important match. We went to Brussels to win the trophy for our fans and our club.
Per I nostri tifosi era importantissima.
Juventus, you know, one of the biggest teams in Europe. We beat these and we truly are, you know, a class above everybody else.
This really was a match to either regain some kind of Italian presence in Europe or confirm the English domination of Europe. We were all looking forward to an outstanding football occasion.
The venue for the biggest game of the season was the Heysel Stadium in Brussels. Arriving in the city on the eve of the match, the Liverpool players' thoughts were on yet another night of European glory.
The general mood in flying out to Brussels was that, you know, we were experienced campaigners. I was looking forward to lifting that magnificent trophy and raise it to the fans, having won that game of football.
On the day of the match, the Liverpool supporters gathered in Brussels. They were preceded by a reputation for good behaviour, despite the history of English hooliganism.
Everyone, from UEFA to Belgian football organization to English police, everyone told the Belgian organizers that the English people coming were normally gone.
I remember the atmosphere before the game was one of carnival, one of fun. Okay, a few people had had a few too many drinks, but there was no sense of danger, no sense of violence.
These Juventus supporters began to move in the afternoon in their droves. No trouble, like I saw no trouble during the day. People were gathering in crowds, there was a lot of colour, but certainly no trouble.
But as the fans looked forward to the game, they had no way of knowing that what lay ahead was one of the biggest tragedies in the history of European football.
It just slowly turned into the blackest hole I've ever witnessed.
As kick-off for the European Cup final between Liverpool and Juventus approached, fans and players made their way to the Heysel Stadium on the outskirts of Brussels. But as the venue for the biggest game of the season, it was not what they expected.
I noticed during our drive to the stadium, and I was aware, I think, of how it looked quite dilapidated.
The thing that struck me about the Heysel Stadium when I walked in was how old-fashioned it was. Higgledy-piggledy, I suppose, is the design. You know, it's just an old stadium, like a lot of them were, that wasn't suitable for maybe modern football, modern crowds.
Tickets for sections X and Y in the stadium had been sold to Liverpool supporters. Next to them, section Z was designated for neutral spectators to avoid rival fans standing side by side. But it was apparent that this plan was not working out.
By looking at the touter, what they were selling, and listening to what they were selling, it was obvious that they had the majority of these tickets and they were getting sold to Italian supporters.
Two Italians who had tickets for section Z were Giuseppe Spalori and his 14-year-old son Giuseppe Jr.
Ci siamo messi in fila per entrare nello stadio e dopo un po'.
We queued up. Then we entered the stadium and found somewhere to stand.
Seduti nei nostri posti.
Also in section Z, with his son Roberto and two nephews, was Otello Laurentini, a Juventus supporter shocked at the conditions of the Heysel Stadium.
Una partita di Coppa Campioni fra due squadre.
A European Cup final between Liverpool and Juventus held in a stadium that was falling apart. I'd never seen anything like it.
With less than an hour to kick off and the ground packed to capacity, the Liverpool players went out to inspect the pitch and greet their fans behind the goal, next to Section Z.
We were signing autographs, and we got to a part where this fence, this wired fence was there, and they had one or two of the local police that were there as well, up and down. But I looked at the fence and I said, that is absolutely terrible. How is that going to keep people apart?
I was fully aware of this, like, mesh fencing between the two fans. Oh, that's strange. European Cup final.
I suppose when you get two lots of supporters standing side by side and all you have is this chicken wire between them, you know, and there's flags being poked in and out through the chicken wire, I think it's only a matter of time before something happens.
There was a point by the fence, by the wire fence, where the police were concentrating. So I looked at it through my binoculars and saw that there was a hole in the fence. The Liverpool fans were trying to get through, and 2 or 3 police with dogs were trying to get at them. The fans reacted by saying, well, you know, come and get us, and if you don't come at us, we'll come at you, and started to widen the gap in the fence, flooded through, and the Italian fans then, almost like sort of shoulder mackerel, then beat a retreat.
With most of the hardcore Juventus fans at the other end of the stadium, those in Section Z were largely ordinary men, women and children. Faced with the charging Liverpool supporters, they had little option but to turn and run.
What could we do? These guys were coming at us with bars and people were trying to escape. It was total confusion.
When the fans ran away from these Liverpool fans, they got up to the top of the stadium and realized they couldn't jump over because it was too high and there was no stairs or fire exits or whatever. So they all piled down.
But still, there was no escape, as fans were pressed against a wall at the end of the terrace.
I was holding onto a crush barrier with my son and nephews next to me. And I looked around. My son was gone.
You started to hear the screaming coming, and you thought, my God, this could be serious. Then there was the huge surging, a lot of screaming, and of course the moment of impact was when the wall went.
We were in the changing rooms, and next minute we hear is an almighty crash. I was sent out to go and have a look and see what it was, and it was only a few yards to the wall, which was broken in two, and there was lots of fans like streaming over. It was a shock to me being there, to seeing what was going on and witnessing it, and then I have to go back in, and what do I say to the lads, to the team?
People were aware that a wall had gone down after a while in the dressing room. Bearing in mind, Joe Fagan's already had his team talk. He tried to keep us focused, but it was difficult with bodies being taken away.
One of my nephews shouted, "Uncle, come quickly. Roberto is injured." He was lying on the ground. I put my head to his chest and could feel his heart beating. But then I realized he was dead, that it was my temple that was beating, not his heart. Then I was overcome with rage.
By now, the death toll was rising, and a television audience of over 1 billion people watched in horror as one of football's most shocking tragedies unfolded.
Io e mio padre eravamo vicini.
I was standing beside my father. Then the crush started and people started falling around me.
Quando la gente ha cominciato a cadere intorno a me.
Then I couldn't see him anymore.
Non l'ho più visto e niente, non l'ho più. Io sono rimasto sotto.
I became trapped under other people. I don't know how long for.
Certa quantità di tempo. In ogni caso mi sono trovato improvvisamente senza.
But suddenly I got free and rolled down on top of the pile of bodies.
Sul mucchio di gente che si era creato. Ho camminato gli ultimi passi.
I walked the last bit over the bodies. At least I didn't have any shoes on, but it's not something I'm proud of.
Sì, non è una cosa di cui vado particolarmente fiero. E non era chiaramente un.
Obviously it was a terrible sight. People were in a really bad way.
Some people were stunned and staring at it, almost in shock and almost paralyzed in disbelief.
Nobody knew what was going on. The police couldn't handle it. The ambulances, they didn't know how bad it was until maybe 15, 20 minutes later, when again they were pulling the bodies out, and again witnessing that was just, it was just beyond belief.
You could see where the lack of organisation was. You could see that these stewards had never dealt with anything like this before. And the police, they were supposed to be riot police, had never dealt with anything on this kind of scale, and they really didn't know what to do.
There was the odd sort of guy with a red crest on of ambulance or whatever, and I remember some stewards around, but there didn't seem to be very many people.
The bodies were put in a row outside the stadium so that nobody could see them. I have images of it, but it's not nice to see.
L'ambulanza lì.
I was with my boy when an ambulance arrived.
E io ero lì con questo ragazzo.
But I didn't know how I could take him home. I didn't know what I was going to tell his mother.
Perché il mio problema era avvisare la mia moglie, no?
In questa ambulanza.
They took me to hospital in an ambulance.
Un ospedale lì a Bruxelles.
But I wanted to go home with everyone else in my group, so they put my leg in a plaster and put me on a plane.
E sono ritornato.
And when I got home, my mother told me that my father was dead.
Che mio padre era morto.
Finally, after 1.5 hours, the Belgian police began to restore order in the stadium. And with bodies still lying in the car park outside, the players would soon be told to prepare for a game of football.
A lot of people had died, in that particular corner, and we just thought to ourselves, is a game more important? I don't think so.
2 hours after the wall collapsed, 60,000 Liverpool and Juventus fans were still in the Heysel Stadium, waiting for the European Cup final to begin. But in the changing rooms, the players still did not know if they would be sent out for a game of football.
We just didn't know what to do with ourselves. It's just so difficult. The dressing room becomes a morgue. Players physically crying, tears dripping down, Me, myself, I knew I wasn't going to get my dream. Not that it mattered. People had died. I couldn't give a damn. I just wanted to get the hell out of there.
With violence breaking out in different parts of the stadium, the Liverpool and Juventus captains were told to address their fans and appeal for calm.
I was given a piece of paper by UEFA to say, read that to your fans. I took one look, read through it, and threw it back at them. I felt it's better coming from the heart, and I can't remember to this day what I said, but I appealed to the fans, because I was led to believe in going to announce it that there's going to be a product. In other words, there's going to be a football game here.
and their game is going to be played, and you're just flabbergasted, and you think, hang on, do these players know that their fans have died? Do they know?
Yes, we knew because our dressing room was like a casualty department.
Di Croce Rossa.
The Belgian authorities feared trouble if angry and frustrated fans were released onto the streets. Eventually, they made the decision that the match would be played.
They came with the instruction to play, and as a good pro does, as a good captain does, once you've been instructed by UEFA for my club, I'll walk the plank and I'll be the leader. Not that I'll be that much of a leader, because my thoughts are off the park and not on it.
Many fans were still unaware that people had died in the crush. The crowd welcomed the players onto the pitch, but this was a meaningless game of football.
As you're walking out on the pitch, you can't help but notice the wall that's down. You can't help but notice that, you know, like the stretcher, the ambulance that was still there.
Looking back on it, knowing that 39 people were lying just outside the stadium while we played a game of football, it shouldn't have been played.
It was all over by the shouting, even tossing a coin. Heads, tails, let them have choice. It was as simple as that.
It was as if someone had put drugs in our tea. After the final whistle, we had no idea what had happened. It was like being in a trance.
And I remember the game being played out in this half-hearted. I think they almost wanted to say, well, you have it. No, no, you have it. And, you know, it seemed to be won on a very dubious penalty in the end. And I think it was a decision to get it done.
The foul from Gary Gillespie on Boniek was outside the box. Afterwards, that didn't matter. It was just as well they had a penalty and scored it. You know, we didn't care.
I just remember the incident with Ronnie Whelan being brought down in a very similar manner, and the referee saying no penalty, there's no way we're going to 1-1.
I was a little upset I didn't get the penalty, but after the game I think, it's still not going to make a difference. And then you just feel empty. We've played a game for nothing. People have lost their lives. Why? What's it all about? Why? I think that was the main question on all the players' lips after that. Why?
Controversially, the Juventus players celebrated their win and stood accused of forgetting their fans who had died in the stadium just 3 hours earlier.
We were at the peak of our careers, but we were also grieving for the 39 people who had died. It was a terrible feeling. I wouldn't wish it on anyone.
Before leaving the stadium, the Liverpool players returned to the terraces of Section Z, where the 39 fans had lost their lives.
It just looked as if carnage had taken place, which of course it did. I remember a handbag lying there, items of clothing, and then it really began to hit us as to what happened.
You could see where the wall was down. Shoes, bits of clothing, debris. It hits you, and it hits you hard then.
Broadcast live around the world, the scenes at Heysel had brought shame upon Britain, and by the next morning, football hooliganism was at the top of the political agenda.
Everyone knew that a Rubicon had been crossed. This was so much worse, so much more public, and happening on a European stage that made the humiliation that much more intense.
Qui sont connus,
They come here, they get drunk, and then directly or indirectly they kill 40 Italians. I think I would be embarrassed if I was English.
With Britain's reputation severely damaged, Margaret Thatcher was determined to respond swiftly.
I wish we could get those responsible, get them before a court, and stiff sentences so that they stop anyone else.
The Prime Minister invited to Downing Street 7 football journalists who had been at Heysel and sought their views on tackling football hooliganism.
The fact that they were obviously immediately drawing in people to deal with it, this was up front, this had gone to the very top of the agenda. It was almost like on the level of, here is a national emergency and it's going to have to be dealt with. She came in distressed and pretty upset about what had happened.
The Prime Minister will say...
We raised the fact that football was in peril. I was feeling pretty passionate about the whole thing, also angry and wanting something done. And there were no holds barred in the conversation. There was a serious sense of urgency and a serious will to get something done.
Whether or not there are extremists manipulating the situation is unclear. It's possible, but certainly it's not a small handful like that now.
There was a real sense that whatever decisions had to be made, and no matter how difficult or unpopular they were going to be, they would be taken, and they would be taken quickly.
In Belgium, political developments also gathered pace as the shockwaves from Heysel reverberated around the country.
It was a bomb that exploded in Belgium. It was a real drama on all levels.
In Parliament, there's been demands for the resignation of this man, Interior Minister Charles Nothomb, ultimately responsible for the police.
I refused to resign because that would have meant the government was accepting responsibility for the disaster. The government supported my decision not to resign.
The day after the tragedy, the Deputy Chief of the London Fire Brigade, Jerry Clarkson, was sent to Brussels to compile a report on the Heysel Stadium. What he found there shocked him deeply.
It does seem to me that the truth has not been stated in this case, because whilst I emphatically say now that I do not condone any form of hooliganism whatsoever, the deaths, in my view, were attributable very, very largely to the appalling state of that stadium. The stadium was unfit to hold that football match. The stanchions that supported the crowd control barriers, the reinforcing bars in the concrete were exposed, and they could not contain any sort of moderate crowd pressure. The wall that collapsed and killed a good many people, the piers of that wall were built the wrong way round. They could not sustain the crowd. And what struck me as absolutely bizarre was a large hut on the top of the terraces, but furthermore under that were stored a wide array of plastic tubes. The length of them and the size of them and the weight of them were absolutely ideal as a weapon. You can imagine a 3 foot to 4 foot long plastic tube. It was absolutely beyond belief.
With that knowledge that we have now, and you look at the stadium in '85, of course, it's a death trap.
Why was a dilapidated athletic stadium chosen for the biggest night in European football?
On his return to London, Jerry Clarkson discovered there was little interest in what he had to say about Heysel Stadium. His detailed report was filed away and forgotten.
Sadly, nobody ever came to me and asked me coldly an inquiry post-event, my view, etc.
In London, the Football Association focused not on the condition of Heysel Stadium, but the future of English football.
I think Mrs. Thatcher would have banned football if she thought she could. She regarded what was happening in football as a cancerous growth that spread out to the rest of society. The English FA thought that what was happening in the rest of society was polluting football. There was a famous incident which has never faded from the memories of those who heard it, when Ted Croker, the then secretary of the FA, was prepared to voice the feelings that I think a lot of his colleagues had, but they never expressed in her presence, that football was the victim of wider trends in society, when he said, "Prime Minister, we want you to take your hooligans out of our game." I mean, I thought she was going to kill him.
2 days after the Heysel tragedy, Thatcher summoned to Downing Street Bert Millichip and Ted Croker, the chairman and secretary of the FA. But their response to events in Brussels did not impress.
There would have been, listen, you're going to have to deal with this, you're going to have to come up with proposals. Here are some of the things I've been hearing. You tell me what you're going to do.
While the FA was under pressure from the Prime Minister, the Belgian government was setting up an inquiry. An investigation was also undertaken by Jules Konings, an expert on crowd control at the Belgian Police Academy.
One has to say, of course, that the first responsible people of the drama are the English hooligans of that time. But then afterwards, there are some other organizations, I think, who have some responsibility, major responsibilities.
Konings discovered that while there was a strong police presence at Heysel, most of the men were deployed outside the stadium.
Based on the informations of the English police, if there were too much policemen inside the stadium, it could be provocative for the supporters. So on that information, they decided not to put too much people inside, but to have a big reserve just outside the stadium so that they could intervene immediately if necessary.
But critically, Konings also discovered that the police walkie-talkies were defective, preventing the reinforcements outside the stadium being called inside to Section Z until it was too late.
Because the information didn't come in time to the man in charge, he couldn't give orders to that reserve that was outside to come in time inside. So that was the real problem, if you take the problem only from the police point of view.
During investigations, it also emerged that the concerns of local hospitals were ignored during preparations for the game, and that medical services at the stadium had been woefully inadequate.
There was only one physician. There were 150 people of the Red Cross, which are amateurs. That's all. I think maybe 10 persons could have been saved if medical teams were present, for sure, and if there was a coordination between the different disciplines.
Undeterred by evidence of the failings of the Belgian authorities, Margaret Thatcher was about to take a dramatic step that would radically alter the future of English football.
Everybody felt let down, and effectively they killed English soccer in Europe. That's what they did.
2 days after the Heysel Stadium disaster, England's shame continued as the bodies of the Italian victims were brought home from Brussels. Back in London, political developments intensified as Margaret Thatcher decided to deal with football hooliganism once and for all.
She seems intent upon finding that solution, and indeed the future of football in this country will depend upon us finding some answer.
Under pressure from Margaret Thatcher, Bert Millichip and Ted Croker of the FA faced the prospect of taking English clubs out of Europe.
I don't think on their own they would have made these decisions. These decisions were forced upon them. But I think they recognized that the rearguard action they'd been fighting against the government and against what was, to a significant degree, an irrational detestation of the game that Mrs. Thatcher had. After Heysel, the game was up.
The FA withdrew English teams from European competition 2 days before UEFA imposed an unprecedented 5-year ban on them. But in English football, many felt they were being punished unjustly.
The government seemed to just step in and say, OK, ban them.
Ban them, no appeal, no argument.
It was a total injustice against Liverpool Football Club because of their fantastic European record and the fantastic European record of their fans. If you're not playing at that level consistently, then it affects you. And I think it affected the whole of English football.
Sent into exile and targeted by new and tougher security measures, English football fell into a steep decline.
These fences were springing up everywhere. You were not allowed on the pitch. From Heysel onwards, Liverpool fans were hooligans, and pretty much every fan in the country was portrayed as a hooligan from Thatcher's government.
On auto and monitor all through.
There was a stimulus to policing, there was a stimulus to clubs to try to contain their supporters, and those crackdowns began to have an effect.
Football became an ailing and unattractive sport, drawing the lowest crowds on record. For England's top clubs, the need for change was obvious, a fact compounded by yet another tragedy, 4 years after Heysel. This time, during an FA Cup semi-final at Hillsborough Stadium in Sheffield, it was 96 Liverpool fans who were crushed to death on the terraces.
It was almost uncanny that another disaster should happen, that the Liverpool fans themselves should then be the ones who would suffer. There was something weird about that. Still then, authority hadn't come to grips with the problem, but it accelerated the Reformation, and in some ways it enabled Liverpool to overcome their guilt at Heysel.
The same week as the Hillsborough disaster, 14 Liverpool supporters were found guilty in a Belgian court of committing violent acts at Heysel, but having already spent time in jail, many were free to go home. For Otello Laurentini, whose son Roberto had died at the stadium, justice had not been done.
Sono molto deluso perché mi aspettavo una sentenza diversa.
At Hillsborough, the suffering had been brought home to England. As the 1980s drew to a close, the process of change that had begun at Heysel was accelerated. Fighting for their survival, the top clubs and the FA created a glamorous new league, the Premiership, and launched English football into a new and modern era. Fueled by revenue from satellite television, the Premiership was still football, but football repackaged as exciting family entertainment.
Suddenly football was there, it was a form of entertainment, you could watch it at home, you could watch it in the pub, and if you went to a game, it was actually quite comfortable. You weren't going to get beaten up, you didn't have to stand and someone would pee in your pocket. You know, it was actually quite a nice thing to do, and that was the transformation.
I think the methods used in policing now are far superior, right across Europe, and probably all as a result of what happened in '85.
You have a game which has become fashionable, popular again, because it's now more beautiful to behold and much more pleasing to attend. It is now the national passion, as opposed to the national shame.
The conditions that allowed a Heysel to flourish, an aggressive, all-male, backward-looking, sometimes, frankly, rather Neanderthal climate, that's gone and can never return, I hope.
I think we've moved on, but we can never forget.
You still see the wall down, you still see the people hanging over the walls and things like that. They're still there. The memories are still there, and fairly vivid memories. A lot more vivid than the game itself, that's for sure.
I just wish on the night we should have cleared that stadium, remembered the dead and gone home. I am gutted that those people died on that night. Of course I am. Gutted.
English football may have moved on since Heysel, but for relatives of those who died at the stadium, moving on is a wish they are still denied.
It's not just the tragedy of my son, or other people's sons. It's what came afterwards for the families. Tragedies were piled upon tragedies. People turned to drugs or had problems at work. There were so many tragedies, so many.
Tante tragedie, tante.